Welcome to Fitness Casual. Real results come from more clarity, not more effort. Today we're talking about carbs, and most people have no idea how much carbs are messing with them. Bloating, energy crashes, wake-ups in the middle of the night. It's not that carbs are good, it's not that carbs are bad, it's really how you use it. If it's too low, it can slow your thyroid, tank your hormones, make your workouts feel really difficult. Or you eat the wrong carbs at the wrong time, you ride the glucose roller coaster, energy crashes, brain fog. If you don't know what you're doing, whether you avoid them or have them, you lose. And so you really need clarity, which is what we always do here. And we're going to show you how to dial carbs the right way, the right timing, the right amount, and enjoy them because they're also really delicious. So I'm Andrew Hayes, and with me is, she's ravenous for carbs, Kat Best.
Hello.
What's your favorite carb? You have one? I know it's hard to pick.
Yes, I think potatoes. I love potatoes, but I also really love white rice. I am like really love jasmine rice, just a plain bowl.
Ooh, yeah.
Like nothing is better. But I also didn't really get into eating more carbs until maybe like after my surgery. Probably get into that more throughout this episode, but it's been fun ramping them up. But I think like a good crispy roasted potato goes very far in my book. Good seasoning, little smoked paprika. I am very into that.
Okay. You didn't want to go like gummy bears or pizza or anything? You just...
No. No, my favorite carbs are ones I eat every week, multiple times per week. So my favorite carbs are not ones I eat once a year.
That's true. Interesting. Okay. I guess, there's what about like basmati rice, brown rice? You get into the nuances there, or you just kind of lump it all? I know there's a glycemic index conversation there, but
yeah, I actually don't eat any brown rice. I do think it's harder to digest. I haven't had it in a really long time, but I like black rice. Big fan of black rice. I like wild rice, and I like jasmine rice. Those are my top three. So you get a lot of variety with those three, but I think black rice is actually really good. It's kind of like nutty. It's different. So I'd like to get variety there, but white rice cooks in 5 seconds. It lasts in the fridge for a really long time. So it's one of those that's like very, very reliable and easy.
I love that. I could go rice. Rice packet. 90-second rice is my go-to. Pro tip, if you eat more calories than someone else in your house, which is common for men, having one of those rice packets on hand is great. Often dinner is like a protein and a veggie, and if you're a guy and you eat 400-calorie dinner, you're gonna be hungry. So you gotta figure that out. And
that's a good one.
I find those rice packets are really helpful. But otherwise, I gotta go pizza. Yeah. And I just feel like everybody knows this, but pizza is like that perfect combination of you have the carbs, but you also have like the sweetness of the tomato sauce and like a little acidity, and then you also have the cheese, which like melted cheese. I don't know what is happening chemically when you melt cheese, but it goes from pretty good to like, oh my God. So pizza is like, it's one of the best foods. And I think it's really interesting too. I was reading about this once, that bread plus meat or bread plus cheese really exists in every culture, just in different form. So like pizza is the same as tacos, is the same as sandwiches, is the same, it's just heroes, whatever you call it, in Greece. It's just like from the beginning of time of modern civilization, we figured out how to like take bread and wrap a bunch of nutrients in it and eat it. But I think, Italians, Greeks, whoever invented pizza, somewhere over in the Mediterranean, probably, they really nailed it with baking it. It's like pretty damn good.
I mean, bread rocks. Like, bread is so good. And I think a lot of people think bread is bad. Like there's no good way to have it. So we're going to do a lot of myth busting in this episode as well. Just to know that you can have your carbs. You just can't have them all at one time in one day. But we're going to make this a lot more clear for everybody as far as like what's good, what's not so great.
That's right. Even Oprah knows. Even Oprah loves bread, which I think was like a really hilarious, kind of on point campaign where she just yelled, "I love bread," if you don't remember that from, I think it was Weight Watchers.
Oh my God, that's
But it was also, I think, not great because to your point, Kat, it kind of sets up bread as like a cheat.
Yeah.
I have a lot of beef with Weight Watchers, aka WW, trying to rebrand. We know who you are. Trying to make everything yellow and green and red. It's like, it's just, as you said in a previous episode, trying to assign some kind of moral value to food is not a great strategy. And also some kind of like green light, red light system. As much as it's simplified, it's not great. It's a little complex, no pun intended. So let's get into that. Carbs are delicious. And there's lots of reasons why you can have them, and there's lots of nuances there. So where do you want to start, Kat?
All right, so we're going to start with what are carbs. I think everyone's heard of carbs, but if I were to ask you, like, what are carbs, I think few people could probably say it back, even though you probably know what foods they are. So carbs are one of the 3 macronutrients alongside protein and fat. When we consume carbohydrates, they are broken down into glucose in the digestive tract. Then that glucose is absorbed into the bloodstream and used as fuel by your cells throughout your body. So carbs break down into usable fuel called glucose. Carbs are the fastest and most efficient energy source, especially if you are an athlete or do high-intensity exercise. Glucose is also the brain's most preferred fuel source, and it accounts for a lot of carbohydrate use per day, including the central nervous system. So even if you are not that active, your body is still using carbs for your brain to function and all sorts of things. Carbs are broken down into, I would say, 3 main categories. One are simple carbs, so this would be like glucose, fructose, sucrose. These are quick absorbing and they give you like rapid energy. These are the ones that could contribute to a faster glucose spike. Not saying that's the worst thing, but that's like the type of carb you eat directly relates to the blood sugar response. And then we have complex carbs. These have longer chains of sugar molecules. They are slower digesting. They have a steadier energy release. Like think of oats, for example. They're not going to spike your blood sugar right away. And then we have fiber. Fiber are indigestible carbs that help regulate digestion, feed gut microbes, and stabilize blood sugar. So with simple and complex carbs, I think if we say one's good, one's bad, I think that is very incorrect. And that's what a lot of people default to saying. Because if you have a simple carb and it's like honey or maple syrup, I'm not calling that bad, right? It's not processed, it is like unrefined, it's just still going to spike your blood sugar rapidly, but there's a lot of nutrients in there, so I want to get away from like good, bad language. It's kind of hard when we're always comparing things, but just think of like simple versus complex. You want more complex in your day, but you don't have to really worry about that all too much when you are like thinking about other things in your diet that will help balance that out anyways. But just so everybody knows, there's 2 main types. You can look up like the GI, the blood sugar response from certain foods. It's called the GI index. I haven't looked at that in a really long time. Actually, I kind of forget, but I think there was a moment where that was super, super important. Even that's been debunked a little bit and like what that means. Like if you eat a date and your blood, it's like one of the most like fast absorbing things, but it's a whole food, right? So that's, still I would say better than having like candy or whatever, but the blood sugar response is really drastic that you may not think otherwise. And I get it, that's a little bit confusing, but I'm going to talk through quality in a little bit.
And I think it's important distinction. There are people who are diabetic or like really close, like pre-diabetic for years, working very closely with their doctor on, well, what is the next step to manage this insulin response that's no longer working properly? And I think those are the people, as far as I understand, looking at glycemic load, glycemic index, like very closely. That's not really who we're speaking to today, although I think we do that as well. We're talking more about energy, fuel, long-term prevention of blood sugar control, all of that. And so I think, to look at it that closely from more of a dietitian perspective is not relevant for the general population. But long-term, that's where you'll end up if you don't understand it, which is why we're doing it.
Yes. And that reminds me, we should probably do an episode dedicated to insulin resistance because it's a different situation.
Sure.
But if you don't monitor your carbs, you can end up in that bucket. And then, it becomes a lot more important what type of carbs you are eating.
That's right. Take it from a skinny person who's had high A1C. You're not immune. We're all on that track if you don't know what you're doing.
So how do carbs benefit the body? There's a lot of ways. I'm not going to list all of them, but I'm going to list plenty. So one is energy production. Like I mentioned, carbs break down to glucose. Glucose enters the cell from insulin, and that fuels your muscles, your organs, your brain. Everything you can think of in your body could be directly fueled by carbohydrate in some way, shape, or form. So super important for energy. They also play a role in glycogen storage. So carbs can be stored in the muscles and liver as glycogen, and these are ready for quick release during activity. Endurance athletes rely very heavily on glycogen stores. This is the idea of carb loading, or like if you played sports when you're in high school and everyone gets together for like a pasta party. That's kind of what's going on, even though like I get that's like a ritual, whatever. But carb loading is a thing athletes will do, and that's really what you're trying to do is load up on carbs, get them in the body so they're being stored. That way your body can use them. So the more muscle you have, the more carbs you can actually store. This is why people who have a lot of muscle need to eat a lot of food, and they can also be very lean. There's a huge component to like your muscle mass and how much carbs you can tolerate, which is another reason we always promote like building muscle, because everyone wants to be able to eat carbs and tolerate them well. But if you are active at all and you're doing prolonged exercise, which could even be like a long bike ride, like doesn't be super strenuous, you're probably tapping into those glycogen stores, and that's also like a big reason why we need to eat them. Carbs are protein sparing. So I mentioned this in a previous episode about what happens when your energy demands are so high but you're not eating enough carbs. Your body will break down muscle. So if you're eating enough carbs and your body is demanding energy from whatever activity you are doing, doesn't even need to be exercise, it could just be like in life you're just burning energy, your body will not break down muscle. So carbs are more muscle protective, which is good. This is a very good thing. This is a very strong reason to eat them. I think like we talked about with protein, there's an upper limit of which you're not really getting more benefits of eating more protein once you hit a threshold. There are benefits of eating more carbs always. So it's not like there's an upper limit there, but if you're active, you want to build muscle and you're eating enough protein, carbs are the main one you want to turn up if you're looking to get more fuel or whatever. They play a big role in gut health. So fiber helps regulate bowel movements, improves satiety, supports a diverse microbiome. These fermentable fibers are really good for lowering inflammation in the body. You know, fiber, we did a whole episode on, could go on and on about it, but that is, fiber only comes from a carbohydrate. So this is a big reason to eat them. Diets that are very low carb tend to be lacking in fiber. That can create all sorts of other issues. I'm going to get into that in a little bit. They also do a lot for our hormones. So eating enough carbs lowers cortisol, it maintains your thyroid conversion, and it supports reproductive hormones, especially in women. So if you go too low carb for too long, you will see it impact. Cortisol will shoot up, thyroid will go down, and hormone function will also go down. So this is a pretty big side effect and a big reason women especially need to eat carbs and not fear them so much, because they do play a big role in stress and hormones and all that stuff. And the last main benefit is cognitive function. The brain runs almost exclusively on glucose. So low carb intake really can impair your concentration, even your work performance, your mood. You know, this could even be if you wake up and go to work without eating anything and you feel not so good or you're not that sharp, like that could play a role. But overall, I think brain fog is one of the biggest things when people eat too low carb for too long, or even notice if they do drop their carbs suddenly, all of a sudden their brain is just feeling a little bit more foggy, can't concentrate. Definitely could be a connection there. So everything I just listed shows how important carbs are for the body. But the type of carb we eat is very, very, very important. So there's a spectrum of quality. I'm going to use the term optimal versus non-optimal. That's the language I like to use because I don't like to say good and bad. And when I'm referring to non-optimal, that doesn't mean don't ever have them. It's just we don't want as many of them in the diet, but it's just good to be able to, I think, identify what's optimal and what's not.
They're not all created equal.
Right. Yes. And it's also pretty straightforward once you figure out like how to identify a processed food to understand quality. It's really not that hard. So optimal carbs would be like fruits, starchy veggies like sweet potato, squash, legumes, whole grains like oats, quinoa, brown rice, or just minimally processed foods in general. These have vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, they have fiber. These are all sorts of things that steady that blood sugar response. They're really good for long-term health. They're good for satiety, nutrients, minerals, vitamins. We need that, we need them for all sorts of other things in our body. So you're not just getting carbs from these foods, you're getting a plethora of other things that are very helpful to help your body, one, use the carbs as they need to, but do all the other stuff in your body. And I would say an optimal carb is a food unprocessed as close to its original form as possible. It's not always going to be perfect, but that's a good way to look at it. For non-optimal carbs, these would be refined grains like pastries, definitely soda, or anything that has a lot of refined sugar in it, candy, ultra processed snacks. That also could include like chips, pretzels, all that stuff. These cause blood sugar spikes, crashes, and they also don't keep you full. So that's probably one of the worst things, is that you can eat a lot of carbs and then you could be hungry an hour later. That leads to overeating and all sorts of other issues. And these foods, these like refined grains and processed carbs, are definitely linked to obesity, type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, cardiovascular disease. Like all of the chronic disease that we talk about can be closely linked to intake of a lot of these foods for this exact reason. And on that note, again, I don't mean don't eat any, but if you look at your day, maybe let's try to make sure those refined carbs or the non-optimal carbs are like 20% or less. Ideally, if you're like 30% or less, good. I think it's kind of easy to like slowly shave it out over time. Don't try to like overhaul your carbs all at once, but it's really easy to just add some potato in or add some brown rice. Even though I mentioned white rice, so I guess white rice it's technically refined because it removes the outer hull, but it's not like, I wouldn't call it a poor quality food. Rice, if you're eating a lot of it when you're really active, like myself and like you, Andrew, you need things that are really easy to digest. We can't always have, if you're eating a lot of carbs and you're eating a lot of fibrous, hard to break down carbs, you're going to have some digestive issues. And this is where it gets a little bit confusing of like what's okay to have, what's not okay. And that's where I think of looking at like just how processed something is. I would even say like a rice pasta noodle would be more processed than like white rice itself. So that's kind of a way to look at it, but not a big deal. Look at the ingredients labels. If you see like on the nutrition facts that there's a bunch of added sugar, probably a good sign that there's like more refined grains in there, but it is a little bit confusing. But if you can identify like where that food came from, like a piece of fruit, it's pretty straightforward, versus like a fruit leather that's, has all the stuff added to it, turned into whatever, like big difference between those two. But I'm not saying you can't have either one of them.
I feel like there's like 3 levels of carb knowledge. Number 1, which we're definitely trying to dispel today, is like you shouldn't eat them. I mean, if you're in the keto crew, fine, go be with your people. This is the wrong podcast for you. We're not going to get into debates here. I think Kat and I are pretty solid in our opinion there, but fine. There's keto people out there. I think they're doing well. So level 1 is like you should eat them. They're important for your diet. Level 2 is understanding what you're talking about now, which is really simple versus complex. Technically, I think it's like the amount of, chains in the sugar, but you don't actually need to think of it that way. You can really think of it like simple as almost exclusively refined foods, sodas and pretzels and bread, and complex is more like, the avocados and the potatoes and stuff. And there's some exceptions. I think fruit is like kind of a simple carb, but I think, Kat, you and I would agree, you should eat fruit. Don't think of it like it's not in the same category as
Definitely
soda. That's
not.
crazy. So once you understand the simple versus complex, then you can make more informed choices of like optimal versus non-optimal and what percent are in your diet. And then there's the third level, which we'll get into, I think, in a little bit, Kat, which is people who hack carbs for performance. And this is a level that like I'm still learning. Kat, I think you know this world well, but I like marathon runners and athletes and bodybuilders and, eating gummy bears mid-workout and stuff. It's like they're really, really cool, the stuff they can do for your body. And so if you don't remember all of it today, that's okay. But I think the simple versus complex, or the optimal versus non-optimal, is something you should walk away from this podcast understanding, because it will really change your life and fix your relationship too with carbs.
Definitely. So I now know you're all wondering, well, how many carbs do you need to eat? This is a tricky question. Yes. But first of all, humans can survive without carbs. It's actually the only non-essential macronutrient, which just means your body can make it in small amounts if you don't eat it. Your body cannot make protein and you cannot make fat out of nothing. So carbs are a little unique there. That also goes to show how important they are for us. Like if your body needs to make them itself, if you're not eating them, very, very important. But surviving without carbs is not thriving. And I would say living without carbs will have a drastic trade-off on performance, hormones, gut health, micronutrients. Not necessarily right away, but it's more the prolonged effect of that. I could see in myself a big difference between eating carbs, and I'll probably get to this in a little bit, of like, if you have gut issues, you really may not be able to tolerate them. That's actually a sign you have gut issues if you can't tolerate them. But I've been on the spectrum of eating low carb because I really couldn't digest much of anything, and I felt really, really good. And then that started to have negative side effects. And then ramp them back up, and then I felt really good again. But I'm not going to blame carbs. There's a lot of other stuff going on, but I could see that there was like a difference there, especially in strength and when it comes to my workouts. Like carbs are very necessary if you're an active person. Okay, so on that note, active people and athletes. So I guess athletes and active people, it's pretty different, but I'm trying to think, this is more for someone who's like, you're really active. Either it's a hobby of yours to do some sport, or, you know, train hard for something, or you really work out quite frequently. Carbs are the primary fuel source for high intensity exercise. General sports nutrition guidelines are 5 to 7 grams of kilogram per body weight per day. So that's very confusing because we don't know kilograms, but what it could mean is a 550-pound person could consume 345 grams of carbs from moderate intake, and then if they're doing like long endurance stuff, that's 480 grams of carbs. That's an insane amount. Wow. That sounds so high, and especially if people are like, you know, working in our program, you know how many carbs you're eating, and then you're like, wow, how could I 4 times that and be okay? Well, this goes to show how much active people really need to fuel their body. Like I said earlier, when you need more calories, we're not adding them in with protein or fat. We're really adding them in with carbs. You could do fat. That would be okay. But ideally, it would be carbs if you're doing, you know, high intensity workouts. Myself, I noticed a big difference in the strength I have and how well I perform in the gym and in jiu-jitsu. And it has nothing to do with my appearance also. Nothing changed eating more carbs. I just felt like I had a lot more fuel in the tank. And that was, you know, really, really helpful. And all right, so now if we're looking at sedentary people, you have lower carbohydrate needs because you're not moving as much, but it doesn't mean you don't need any. If you're more sedentary or you're walking 5,000 steps per day or less, you should really prioritize the high fiber carbs. To support satiety and gut health, you really want to not be spiking your blood sugar all of the time. Balanced meals is important, but for this individual, I think anything between 100 to 200 grams per day, depending on your body size and your goals, is an appropriate amount. So we're still eating carbs even if you're not doing as much, but you definitely don't need as much as someone who is really active. I think the term "you have to earn your carbs" is kind of a good one. In a way, I think it's a little off-putting for people. But if you sit on your butt all day and you work an office job and you're barely moving, you should not be having sodas and all of that stuff. Someone who's really active can totally get away with soda and be kind of just fine. Floyd Mayweather drinks Coca-Cola all the time. That's like what he drinks during his workouts. He drinks so much Coca-Cola. That man is in amazing shape. No one would argue that that guy has an issue. But that's kind of the point, is that if you are sedentary, you need to really earn your carbs if you're going to eat a lot of them. Doesn't mean you can't have any, but if you want to have a lot, or you want to, really eat a lot of candy or sugar, you should be more active and it would work better for you. So I think there really is something to be said for that. Not meant to scare people, but it is really important. Or if I have a really low activity day and I'm not moving that much, I would probably just naturally eat fewer carbs because I know I just didn't really need them naturally. And if I have a really high activity day, I'm trying to make sure I refuel in that way properly because I know my body needs them.
And I want to add the insulin. I think you're right. We should do an episode on it. It's one of the most common things we get people in our program, and lower it quite often. The A1C, your activity level and your lean muscle mass composition, as Kat already mentioned, both also are massive contributors to your A1C. And so I think if, again, generally speaking, you might go to the doctor, get a high A1C read, and they might tell you to watch your carb intake, which isn't wrong. It's just incomplete, because you can also dial many other things, like your activity level. And there's almost no limit as to how many carbs you can eat if you are active. And like, I know people who do triathlons, they're probably still undernourishing, but they could probably eat 800 carbs in a day because they have a reason to do that. And so like, I think like the calories in, calories out episode, so many people think I need to lose weight, diet, or I need to lower my A1C, diet. And like, yes, but don't think so black and white of carbs are bad, calories are bad, exercise more. There's a lot of different ways you can put these pieces of the puzzle together. And so, yes, I know it's a little complicated, but if you like carbs, yes, I think earning them, so to speak, as much as that like could border on, disorderly behavior, I think it's a good perspective shift of, why don't you take up some new hobbies or, bike to work or whatever, and then you can have some more carbs and enjoy it and be guilt-free.
This is why intra-workout nutrition, so like mid-workout for people who work out longer than an hour or doing something very strenuous, it's all about carbs, nothing else. No one's eating protein in the middle of a workout. No one's eating fat. Everyone has to replace their glycogen stores. So if I work with an athlete, we work intra-workout. It could be even like 30 to 50 grams of carbs for that hour per workout you have to refuel. And that's hard for people to wrap their brain around, but like that, if you're in that place where you are refueling mid-workout, like you're probably very efficient at utilizing carbohydrate and in pretty good shape. Okay, perimenopausal women. So this is there. I can't give a number of carbs eat because it's very much dependent on like body weight, activity levels at this point, but it's really important for women to know, especially if you have hormonal issues or you're going through hormonal change. If you're too low carb, it will increase cortisol, it can impact your sleep, and it can reduce your muscle mass, which will have drastically negative effects on fat loss in general, how you feel, thyroid, and it can make your perimenopausal symptoms worse. If you are, I would say if you're in this state, perimenopause, and either you're trying to maintain or maybe a little bit of fat loss, I want your carbs to be like 30 to 40% of your total calorie intake. Rarely do I put someone's carbs below 30% of their overall calories, but it will happen sometimes. Some people also have a preference for more fats. If that's the case, fine, but I usually don't dip much below that 30% number, so that could be a good one to aim for, but that's based on calories. Just however many calories you're eating, 30% of that. But you need to pair it with protein and fats to help balance blood sugar and, all the other stuff, hormones and whatnot. But carbs are important when you're in that phase. In the next chunk, I'm going to talk about long-term low-carb dieting, but that's where women, especially in that, 40s, 50s, menopause range, your carbohydrate intake can make a really big impact on how you feel overall. For men, lucky men have a higher carb tolerance because they have more lean mass on their body and they have more stable hormones, right? Men do not go through all the fluctuations a woman goes through in a month, and men can maintain performance and body comp with pretty high carb percentages, even like 40 to 60% of their total calories, especially if they're active. So I would say men could just have a naturally larger threshold due to muscle mass. So I think men can get away with eating more. But if a man is sedentary and not moving so much and doesn't have much muscle mass and is overstressed and not sleeping, that would not so much be the case. But I do think, if you're a little bit active, men can definitely like 40% of the intake, 40 to 50% for sure. Some people they have a really fast metabolism, which if that's you, you know who you are. We could do 50% of the intake. It depends. You also need to know how you feel, and this is why knowing how many carbs, protein, and fat you eat is really helpful because you can kind of have a sweet spot. Like for me, I really like eating a lot of fats. I feel really good. But for my performance or whatever, I knew I had to dial up the carbs. But it would be so much easier for me to be on a very high fat diet than a high carb because that's just like how I like to eat. But you just kind of need to learn yourself, your body, what feels good there, and then you can play around with it. But just be mindful of not being too low carb for too long, whether it's intentional or accidental. Sometimes it's all accidental. Maybe you have no idea how much you're eating and you're accidentally under eating carbs. Very common for women especially. But there are impacts of low carb eating. Low carb, there is no official definition for what low carb means, but low carb in my mind is lower than most people probably think it is. So it's about 25% of your total calories or less. There's really no official way. If you're very low carb, you're eating about 20 to 50 grams of carbs per day. That's more in alignment with the keto diet. So I would call that extremely low carb, and then low carb could be, maybe we're going below 100 per day, 110, 120. There's no like official number here, but it's heading towards 100 or less. If you are eating very low carb, like in that keto range, you are excluding all grains, starches, legumes, fruits probably. You might just be eating vegetables sometimes, but you really don't have any threshold to have more than that. So you are not adding any potato, any rice, not a single starch one time in the day to your diet. The short-term positives of this are actually very staggeringly impressive. It can reduce your blood sugar, it can improve your insulin sensitivity very quickly, and it can really aid in fat loss. You can lose fat fast if you are eating no carbs, very fast. And this is why the keto diet, when people are on it and they're like, wow, it's melting off my body and I'm not hungry at all, it's kind of amazing in the beginning, and then what happens? So short-term positives, definitely, like, I am here for that. I actually don't have much of an issue for doing it in the short term, but a lot of people do something to lose weight and then think that's also how they sustain it. That's not the case. But if you want to do a short-term low carb, like, I've worked with people who are like, I have a photo shoot in 2 weeks, what do I do? And I'm like, no carbs, gone. Boom, we lose a lot of water, we lose some fat, you're very depleted and you will look very lean. But how does that person feel? Not good. But if you need to look a certain way, you don't care how you feel. But that's just like, it's a very good tool if you need to move weight very quickly. But the long-term risks of low carb eating are very staggering. So it can increase cortisol and your stress response. I don't care how zenned out you are, how much you meditate, how much therapy you're in. If you're not eating enough carbs, it will increase the cortisol response. So there's not much you can do about that. That's physiologically what happens. It will suppress your thyroid hormone conversion. This is how a lot of people end up in like a hypothyroid state. Hashimoto's, like for me, I wonder how much of my autoimmune stuff contributed to that. I have no idea, but I think it definitely plays a role for sure. It will reduce reproductive hormones. So for women, you will lose your menstrual cycle, amenorrhea will happen. This is very common in active women who often kind of see not having a period as a plus, because it's like, oh, I don't have to be annoyed that 1 week of my life where everything falls apart. Like, a lot of people see that as a positive thing, but it's not, because it is a sign that hormones are going to start diminishing as well. If you're having irregular cycles, usually that could be something related there. But for me, like, I'm someone who that was happening to, and I just didn't really care until my thyroids or my hormones like didn't exist. And I'm like, all right, maybe I need to look into this a little bit more. Lower fiber intake will impact your gut health. You could get gut dysbiosis, but constipation definitely can increase. Like, if you're not eating any carbs, you could definitely be more constipated just because you're not getting any fiber in your diet. And that, just being more constipated over time, leads to gut issues. Gut issues leads to constipation. It's like a whole cycle there. And you definitely can lose your exercise performance. And arguably, I would say, if you are trying to lose weight, lose fat, and you are losing strength over time and it's never getting better, like you're constantly losing and getting weaker, that's a very bad sign. You may some days not be able to push as hard, or maybe if you're losing a lot of weight, you may lose some strength. Like, I'm talking like if you're doing like heavy barbell lifts, you may lose a little bit off your big like max lift. But for the most part, if you're not lifting super heavy, we should not be getting weak. And if you are, or you used to be able to do 30 minutes on the treadmill and now you're really gassed out at 15, there's probably, some exercise performance going on there. And then think about what that's actually happening inside your body. If your body just cannot produce enough energy output, your exercise output will also reduce. So now we are more burnt out, and then you're also able to push less hard in the gym. So we're probably going to lose muscle, and that's kind of a vicious cycle because it's really hard to get that back. Not saying it won't happen every once in a while when you're dieting, definitely can happen, but it shouldn't be like a very drastic drop where it stays down. And this is why low carb is not a sustainable strategy for the long term, but temporarily can be very effective. But you need to, if you're dropping carbs, you need to have a plan to get them back up. And I think that's where people don't think about that much, or they're like, wow, I feel good. Or sometimes it's simple. When people cut out carbs, maybe it feels simple. Just be like, if I avoid a food group, now I know what to focus on. Sure. But it definitely can backfire. Or what I think is most alarming to me about people who come off of a keto diet is that they have a fear, like a phobia of having carbs, even a normal amount of carbs. And these are also people who are usually overweight. Maybe they lost weight, they gained it all back. Now they're not eating any carbs and they're very scared to eat them. And that leads to a whole cycle of things. But I think, cutting out a whole food group can cause all sorts of misunderstandings about how important that is. And then you shouldn't be afraid to have some potato or, some starchy veggies. Like, sure, I don't want anyone to be afraid of anything, but if you're like, I never want to have soda again. I'm not going to argue that. But if you can't have like a healthy whole grain because you think it's bad for you, now we have an issue, I think. So that's just what also happens with low carb dieting is I think your perception of healthy eating can definitely get a little bit warped and some fear component can come in and we don't want that. Yep. On the other hand, there is a impact of a carb-dominant diet. So that is a diet where there's low protein, low fat. And I would say this is probably where the majority of Americans fall. And it doesn't mean you have to eat a bunch of carbs. It just means in your day, if we break down the macros, there's more carbs than anything else. So I would call that more, carb-dominant. And this is also refined carbs. So it's not like all the healthy carbs, but these are the people who are most at risk with obesity or poor metabolic health, like chronic disease issues. This is because if you eat mostly carbs, you are on a blood sugar roller coaster all the time. You're going to get frequent spikes and crashes, which make you feel fatigue. You will have really strong cravings. You might get irritable throughout the day. You might even get shaky in between meals. That is a sign you are definitely relying hard on carbs and you don't have enough of the other good stuff in your day to balance that out. And that, if you're doing that day after day after day, battling cravings every day, feeling so tired, having trouble getting out of bed, like this is where people just feel terrible, make bad choices that exacerbate them feeling terrible, and then they get a chronic disease, and like that whole cycle continues just because the food you eat is just not fueling your body properly. You definitely can lose muscle. So if you're not eating protein, the body will break down muscle tissue for amino acids. So this could be, even if you're super active or not, this is what's going to happen if you're not eating enough protein. And this also means you could lose weight and look kind of exactly the same, but a slightly smaller version of yourself. You're not going to look toned. You're not going to have like good body composition. You may just look a little bit smaller, but a lot of people want to look toned or look athletic or fit when they lose weight. It's not going to happen if you're eating mostly carbs with no protein. But you can lose weight. Like, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying you can't. It's just not going to have the outcome you probably want. Your hormones can definitely get disrupted in this state as well. Without dietary fat, sex hormones and your brain health suffer. Fats are very important for you as an individual. So your hormones can be just as disrupted from eating too many carbs as they can be from not eating enough of them, which is confusing. I know. And that's why everybody has to find that sweet spot. And then ultimately, if you're living in this state, you will gain weight. You will probably have nutrient deficiencies. Your energy levels will not be good. Metabolic decline. Like you are probably going to experience chronic disease at some point in your life if this continues. I think there's also a genetic component here for like how much tolerance people have. Like, for example, my boyfriend can eat a lot of carbs and he tolerates them just fine. Someone would eat the same amount of carbs as him and like not be okay. So there definitely is a genetic component, which is why you also need to understand where you fall in that spectrum and tune into how you feel and how much you eat, how much your activity you're doing. All of that is really important, but we don't want to be too far on either spectrum for the long term. If it's temporarily, whatever, not a big deal, but this is more for like long-term sustainable health and fat loss results. You just want to have enough carbs, and you also need to be able to get a sense of the timing, like when you want to have them, which is a little bit confusing. But if I can do some myth busting, eating carbs at night is not bad. I know this is a big one where it's like no one talks about eating anything at night being bad besides carbs. It's like carbs after dark. Whoa. No, nothing you eat at night when the sun goes down is magically going to like turn into fat on your body. I would say if anything, evening carbs, they can increase serotonin and melatonin production. So they can actually improve your sleep quality. I think people who really have issues eating before bed might have also some underlying like gut issue, like you're not digesting properly or you get some sort of reflux, or maybe are you choosing like really fast digesting carbs, like a bunch of sugar. It's very different than having a dinner with like potato or quinoa in there. Very, very different in how that's going to land in your body, but also know how you feel. Me personally, I can eat my biggest meal of the day before I go to bed that has a lot of carbs and I'm sleep fine. I have no issue. Someone may have the same thing and not be okay. I don't know, but I think there's nothing wrong with eating carbs at night. I know there's also people who will be like, you should eat most of your carbs at breakfast. That way you can burn them off throughout the whole day. I don't think we need to think. I think that the logic makes sense. I get what that means. And I also don't know if eating no carbs and then having all of them at night is a good idea either. But I think we don't need to get, that specific about it. I'm not that worried. But I think bookending your carbs for energy and sleep could be a good idea. So that could mean breakfast and dinner, you have a good amount of carbs at that meal. Maybe at lunch, you don't necessarily need to have them. But for timing purposes, I also think we want to have carbs before a workout for energy and post-workout for glycogen replenishment. So we're kind of rebuilding. It's not the end of the world if you don't, but for someone who does care a lot about timing and performance, we care a lot about when you have carbs. If you don't care that much about performance and you're just I just want to work out, I don't really care. I don't really care either what you do. But for people who's an athlete or myself, I have my largest amount of quick carbs before I go work out. And I just do that because I know my body can utilize that fuel very quickly versus the other way around. But if you're an active person, for timing, I would probably say eat carbs throughout the day. If you're not that active or you have a fat loss goal and carbs are kind of tight, then I don't think you have to have them at every single meal. I think if you bookend them morning and night, that could be a good strategy. And that's what I tell a lot of our clients to do, because breakfast kind of fuels you for the day, and then usually dinner, family meal, maybe you want to eat with your kids and you want to have whatever carb they're having, or the mac and cheese, the pasta, whatever. That's usually a time where people want to have room for them. And if that's the case, then I just say all right, can lunch just be protein, veggie, very fat heavy, so we're not really missing that starch. But you totally could have a starch at every meal of the day. Nothing wrong with that, but I think you also don't necessarily have to.
You're touching on an important point. This is an episode about carbs exclusively, pretty much. But obviously everything's connected. You mentioned standard American diet, which isn't actually all that standard, really. It's just not great. I think it's just a blanket way of saying we don't eat super healthy as Americans. But I think that's an important distinction, is some standard American diet means lots of processed meat, like deli meat and hot dogs. Sometimes it means lots of processed carbs, like soda and bread. Sometimes it means, skipping meals or whatever. And so I think it's important to remember that all of your choices are connected. And if carbs are your number one thing and you want to eat them at every meal and you're decently active, that should be fine. Just keep an eye on your processed meat and your drinking empty calories and all these other things that impact everything from your energy to your A1C to your weight gain and all of that, because it's all a factor, right? We all have trade-offs. I always talk about the beer picture that's behind me as we speak. If you're watching this on YouTube, it's that is something I've worked into my life. But I don't eat a lot of hot dogs, which lots of people eat on the golf course. I'm the guy enjoying a beer instead, but I'm not doing all of it, because if I did all of it, I'd be in a lot of trouble. And so just remember, you have to pick, even though we're only talking about carbs today, you get to kind of choose how you want to make your diet look based on your preferences, lifestyle, all of that.
Yeah, even just like we talk about protein a lot, you can eat the perfect amount of protein and still have a plethora of issues and poor things in your diet. So not one thing isn't the best thing at all. So, you just need to understand your body. But as far as some functional tips for carbs, no naked carbs is definitely something I stand by, no matter who you are, what you're trying to do, whatever your goal is. I think this is very important. And the idea is very simple. It's just pairing your carbohydrate with a protein, fat, or fiber. Helps slow down the digestion, helps reduce blood sugar spikes, and improve satiety. This is a very, very handy tip. Meals, I'm trying to think of adults who, I guess a bowl of pasta with nothing else in it, with butter. Someone's having that as a meal right now.
Yeah.
That would be a naked carb. I feel like kids tend to eat a lot more naked carb vibe, but adults, it definitely can happen. I think snacks is where naked carbs really, really take off. Just eating a bag of pretzels or just eating one banana on its own. The idea doesn't matter how good or optimal or non-optimal your carb source is, but that is just paired with other things that help enhance the absorption of that and slow down digestion and the blood sugar spikes. So no naked carbs. If you don't care about timing of anything, think about that one. If you do care about timing, you're athletic or whatever it matters to you, or you just have to eat a lot of carbs and you have to figure it out, have them throughout the day. But no naked carbs should be a very important rule, no matter who you are, what you have going on.
Bagels, jelly sandwich, cereal. There's definitely some that I think are normalized in society. Cereal, that are
right.
when I see as a nutritionist, I'm I don't judge, but I'm oh God, I would never just for the reason you outlined. But people don't think about that because it's normal to eat a jelly sandwich, but it's not for A1C.
Yeah.
Put a little peanut butter on it, something else maybe, I don't know. Nut butter would be good.
I think I ate a bagel every morning in high school for like 4 years straight. That's the breakfast.
When I lived in New York
ultimate.
City, I would get up at like, 8:50, hungover probably because I was drinking every night. And then I would run to work and I'd buy one of those bagels from the little carts, like the hot dog carts.
Yep.
Maybe with butter on it, which I think barely counts not as a naked carb, but not really. And then go work my high stress job and probably have something crappy for lunch and then go drinking at night. And then I wondered why my A1C was through the roof, even though I wasn't overweight. So no judgment. We've all done it. It's just shocking to look back in hindsight.
Yeah. And shout out to the breakfast sandwich. Because if you put an egg and some bacon or, even pork roll, maybe pork roll's not the best. But, you put some meat, some eggs, even some cheese, cream cheese on there. It does help a little bit because you get other things in there. So, I would say maybe